All right. Well, that being said, let's go ahead and begin today's webinar. Thank you all for participating in that brief survey, a brief poll question, excuse me. So again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the OJJDP FY 2020 Juvenile Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program. My name is William Moore, and I am with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And as your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube page at a later date. For those of you wishing to download a copy of important documents and resources related to today's webinar, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will find the webinar PowerPoint and an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address technical related questions. Simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button. Please note that at the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where our presenter will address some of the questions that are posed during today's presentation. Please type your question into the chat box as they arise, and we will address them. All right. Now, for those of you, and I know given the current climate, a lot of you all probably are not viewing in a group. However, if by any chance you are viewing, say, with another individual in the same room with you, we do want to get a good idea of how many people are joining us. So please help us count. If you are viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. However, if you're viewing with another individual or multiple individuals, please type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. Again, I know most of you are more than likely by yourself right now, but if at any chance that you're viewing with additional people, please help us count by typing in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. Also, I want to take the time as well to let our audience know that we are experiencing high usage of webinars. And so if at any time you are having a disconnect with audio, or if anything happens with our audio, please note that we do have many precautions put into place in order to resolve any audio issues that may occur. That being said, I will now turn today's grant solicitation webinar over to our moderator and presenter, Ms. Catherine Berry. Catherine, take it away.
Thank you, William, and welcome, everyone. I hope everybody, in light of the current situation, is safe and snug at home, that you are safe and healthy. I'm definitely wishing that for every single one of you. So please be safe out there, practice your social distancing, and we will get through this. That being said, welcome to the Juvenile Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program Solicitation webinar for applicants. And I just want to upfront say that if you are here expecting information about the program and best practices, etc., this is not the webinar for you. We currently have a competitive funding opportunity out right now. And this webinar is going to go over the application process for that competitive funding opportunity. So I did just want to state that up front. Now, before I go over the topics that we'll cover in this solicitation webinar, I did want to provide a little bit of background about this program. So the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program has actually been out for a number of years, and it's a program that has been run by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And this year, they reached out to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, my office, OJJDP, and said, we'd like to carve out some of the appropriated funds that we get for this program and ask that you draft a solicitation that specifically targets justice-involved youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance abuse disorders. And so we said, sure. This is a brand new program for us. We have never before released a competitive funding opportunity under this program that specifically targets justice-involved youth. So we have a lot to unpack during this solicitation webinar, and bear with me because this is a new program for me. And if you ask really complicated questions, I may not be able to answer them during this webinar, but I would invite you to for sure follow up and submit any kind of complicated questions you may have to the Response Center, and they do eventually directly come to me, and I can take the time to research the answer and get you the answer that you need in order to successfully write a confident application for this program. So this webinar is going to provide a general overview of the program that's outlined in the solicitation, as well as go over the goals and objectives that are detailed in the solicitation. And then we're going to try to unpack the many priority considerations that are written in there this year, cover application requirements, and then at the end I'm going to also provide some tips, application tips, in addition to lastly the Q&A part. So the application due date for the solicitation right now still stands as May 4th. I know that some of you may be wondering if that deadline will be extended in light of the current situation right now, where a lot of people are at home, making it very difficult to write a grant application. Very understandable. I do know that deadlines that we had for solicitations that were before April 1st were extended for 2 weeks in light of the current situation. I can't say what will happen with this solicitation, but what I can say is right now, the deadline still stands as May 4th. So high-level overview of this, this program is that we will be awarding 3-year grants. So you should be planning on a 3-year program proposal. And the overall goals of this program through this competitive funding opportunity are to support between justice, juvenile justice agencies and mental health agencies to improve responses and outcomes for youth, justice-involved youth with mental illness and co-occurring mental illness and substance abuse. I'm going to start saying substance use because I know that that's what the field finds to be more appropriate. The statute, which governs the appropriated funds for this opportunity, uses substance abuse all throughout. So that is what is written in the statute, which is why it's there. But I'm going to start referring to it as substance use disorders throughout the rest of this webinar. This program will also be supporting public safety efforts through partnerships with juvenile justice, mental health, and substance use agencies to enhance responses to justice-involved youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. Now, the following agencies are eligible to apply, which include states, units of local government, and then also federally recognized Indian tribal governments. However, OJJDP will only be accepting applicants that demonstrate a joint collaborative project, because that is the whole purpose of this program, right? Juvenile justice and mental health collaboration program. So we expect that the applications are joint between juvenile justice agencies and mental health agencies. And I will go into that in detail a little bit later on what qualifies as a juvenile justice agency or a mental health court, as well as a mental health agency. So if you are, for example, a law enforcement agency, police department that is intending to apply for, say, training funds, we fully expect that this is going to be a joint application between you and your local mental health agency. It's supposed to be a collaborative proposal, a collaborative project, incorporating the roles and positions of all stakeholders involved. Now, what qualifies as a juvenile justice agency? And I'm going to start referring to the statutory requirements, or the statute says this, because this entire solicitation and appropriated funding from Congress is governed by a statute that was, sometimes they're vague, and we're able to kind of run with these programs and develop our own programs, but this statute for these funds was actually quite specific about what it wanted and what was allowable. So according to the statute, a juvenile justice agency in this, for this funding opportunity is an agency of a state or local government or its contracted agency that is responsible for detection, arrest, enforcement, prosecution, defense, and yes, that includes our public defender agencies, adjudication, incarceration or detention in the case of youth, probation, or parole, but that wouldn't necessarily apply to youth in this situation, relating to the violation of criminal laws of that state or local government. And note that a juvenile justice agency, as was mentioned in the previous slide, does also count, a mental health court does count as a juvenile justice agency. One of the questions prior to this webinar is if a juvenile mental health court would qualify, and if you do have a juvenile mental health court, that would most certainly qualify. A mental health agency under the solicitation is a state or local government or its contracted agency responsible for the mental health services or co-occurring mental health and substance use services provided in your jurisdiction. And then a substance abuse or use treatment agency is considered eligible as a mental health agency for this competitive funding opportunity if that agency provides services to individuals with co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. So now I'm going to start getting into the nuts and bolts of the program-specific information for this funding opportunity. Again, the statute was very specific about what grants it wants awarded under this program, and it stated verbatim that it will, the funds will be used to support programs that want to create or expand the following areas. So mental health courts or other court-based programs serving youth. I would say youth, it should say youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. It will also support programs that are geared toward training law enforcement officers or personnel of the applying juvenile justice agency and or mental health agency. And the training should be geared to help those personnel better respond to youth with mental health and co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. It will also support collaborative efforts of juvenile justice and mental health agencies that are seeking to promote public safety in their communities by offering mental health treatment services and where appropriate, substance use treatment services for justice-involved youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. And then lastly, it will also support any intergovernmental collaborative efforts between state and local governments to enhance support to justice-involved youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. So there's a whole the wide spectrum of what this program will support, but it's got lots of different buckets of areas where the overall theme really is for juvenile justice and mental health agency collaboration to better serve justice-involved youth with mental illness. Now, written in this statute, they have two very clear phases for proposed projects under this solicitation. So first there will be a planning phase, and then there will be an implementation phase. So the program or project that you're proposing is going to have initially a planning phase where you're going to have planning activities on what your program is going to look like, what your training is going to look like, et cetera, whatever your proposal is addressing. There is a required short, very brief planning period, and then the rest of your award will be an implementation phase. Note that you will be submitting one application detailing the activities for both phases. So there's not an application for a planning phase and an application for an implementation phase. It's all in the same award. It's all the same program in the same 3-year period. But through these phases, with your partner, you're going to be developing a coordinated approach to implementing or enhancing services for justice-involved youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use in your jurisdiction. So the planning phase. Again, this is all in the solicitation, but I tried to kind of break things down into what was important. It's a 4 to 6 month period. You are only allowed to allocate about up to $50,000 of grant funds in your budget to support this brief planning phase. And in your proposals, we're expecting you to identify in your application the specific planning activities you intend to do at the beginning of your award to support the implementation of your proposed project. And note, you will actually get training and technical assistance from the Council of State Governments Justice Center at no cost. So should you want it, we are going to connect you with free training and technical assistance to help you through that planning period. And then there is a planning phase completion requirement in order to release the rest of your program implementation funds, which then leads you into the implementation phase, which should be about 2.5 years of the 3-year award. And as I said, the remainder of your funds would be released for the implementation period. And activities during the implementation phase should be detailed and support one of the areas that I just listed, as well as activities listed on page 5 of the solicitation. And again, during the implementation phase, you will receive free at no cost training and technical assistance should you need it or want it. Now, the implementation phase in your proposal is obviously going to be kind of meatier than the planning phase activities that we want you to describe in your proposal. So I wanted to kind of give some examples of what you should be detailing in your proposal about the implementation phase. You really should be describing the responsibilities of each agency that is partnering for this proposal, what they are going to be doing during the implementation phase, how will you be using the grant resources, etc. Some of these examples are more for the proposals that are going to be describing direct services to justice-involved youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use. So for those of you that are doing more systems improvement work or are proposing perhaps a training personnel, you're not necessarily going to be describing how you're going to be supervising the youth that you serve, etc. But there is a way to describe exactly what you intend the training to do, or what the goals and objectives you want to address for systems improvement in serving justice-involved youth with mental illness and co-occurring mental illness and substance use in your jurisdiction. So we fully expect you to document what's in it for everybody involved, what's in it for the Juvenile Justice Agency, and what's in it for the Mental Health Agency, and then ultimately what's in it for the youth that are ultimately going to be impacted by your program and or training and or systems and improvement initiative. So you should also be able to describe the target population, which is the justice-involved youth with mental illness in your jurisdiction. What are you trying to do to impact or better respond to their needs? The statute also wants folks to address these different areas if it's applicable to your proposed program. Again, many of these things that the statute outline may or may not actually align with what you're trying to do with your proposal and your plan, and that's understandable. But if you are proposing a program that would touch on some of these different areas, we would fully expect you to touch on them, such as ensuring that youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders receive individualized, validated, needs-based assessments to determine, plan, and coordinate appropriate services. Again, these are more for the direct services program proposals. You should be touching on the development of plans for making treatment services available and accessible to youth with mental illness and co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders at the time of their release from the juvenile justice system. And then you should also be thinking about determining the eligibility for federal benefits for the target population as well. Lastly, and these again are more for our direct services folks, you should be ensuring that the youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders have adequate supervision and access to effective and appropriate community-based mental health services. That's definitely critical for you direct services folks. And making sure that other support services are available for the youth as well to ensure that when they re-enter their communities, they have some wraparound supports for them. And then you also should be considering strategies as much as possible to address any developmental or learning disabilities that arise from a documented history of abuse if it comes up for any particular youth that you're serving. And again, this is more for our direct services folks that are applying for direct service programs. You should also be ensuring that the youth that you're serving have prompt access to defense counsel when and if they are facing charges that would trigger their constitutional right to counsel. And if you are a state proposing a statewide plan, you really need to be describing how the collaboration program relates to any pre-existing state juvenile justice and mental health plans and programs. But hopefully if you're applying for this funding as a state to do some statewide work, if that's you, there isn't anything yet existing, and this is why you're here. And then lastly, this last bullet point is really, if you are proposing an application here, you need to make sure that you have gotten in touch with all of the relevant stakeholders in the community that are touched by this population, victim advocates, the justice-involved youth themselves, the families of the justice-involved youth. Is the program that you're proposing something that they would all support? You should be getting their input, and much of that can be demonstrated in your program narrative or through letters of support. Now, there's a whole section in this solicitation on all of the various different priority considerations and priority areas. We have program-specific priority areas. We have, and then we also have the Office of Justice Programs priority areas. So I'm going to now take some time to unpack those for you. This is the first year where we've had a ton of priority considerations, so bear with me. But for this specific program, under the statute, it has priority areas that it listed. So again, I wanted to make sure that for those of you that are thinking about applying for this program or have ideas in mind, if any of your ideas are related to these next bullet points that I'm going to go over, you should definitely make sure that you make it clear that you are want to be considered for a program-specific priority consideration. So under this statute, we are directed to give priority consideration to any programs that are designed to promote effective strategies by law enforcement to identify and reduce risk of harm for youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. Also, programs that are designed to promote effective strategies for the identification and treatment of juvenile justice-involved female youth with mental illness and co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. Programs that are promoting effective strategies to expand the use of mental health courts. So those juvenile mental health courts as well are included here, which are including use of pretrial services and related treatment programs for those justice-involved youth. Programs that are proposing interventions that have been shown to reduce recidivism, but they have to be evidence-based. That's what that empirical evidence requirement means. So if you want to be considered for that priority consideration and you're proposing specific interventions to reduce recidivism, make sure you are using current citations that demonstrate that they are in fact evidence-based practices and interventions. And then if you are proposing a program that intends to promote the use of validated assessment tools to target justice-involved youth with moderate or high risk of recidivism and in need of services, you may also request that you receive program-specific priority consideration. Now, as I alluded to before, for program-specific priority consideration, if you want that consideration, you have to make it abundantly clear in your program narrative. I mean, you can even a sentence or two saying we are applying for the program-specific priority area of X, and cut and paste the language verbatim from the solicitation and stick it in there. I know it seems awkward, but you have to make it crystal clear to us and make it crystal clear to the reviewers that you are seeking program-specific priority consideration under the solicitation. And be sure, if you are seeking this priority consideration, that you describe the issue that the program-specific area will address and how you will implement the program-specific area as well. All right, now I'm going to unpack the Office of Justice Programs priority areas, which are different from the program-specific ones that I just mentioned. As a whole, out of all of the solicitations that the Office of Justice Programs is putting out right now, these are the priority areas that all of the solicitations have right now for applicants. We are going to be giving priority consideration to federally recognized tribal applicants, programs that address specific challenges in rural communities, programs that demonstrate that they are going to be benefiting individuals from areas, high poverty areas or persistent poverty counties, and then also programs that are going to be offering enhancements to public safety in economically distressed communities, which are formally called qualified opportunity zones. Now, in addition to the priority areas that I just mentioned, as well as the program-specific priority areas, the Office of Justice Programs is giving special consideration. This is brand new this year to these areas. So folks from a state or local government entity that operates at least one correctional facility as defined by the statute listed right there. I will be honest with you, I've not read that statute, so I can't unpack that for you right now. As well as there in Appendix B of the solicitation, there is a detailed explanation for applicants that are enhancing criminal justice and public safety by indicating an agreement to comply with board conditions related to cooperation with federal law enforcement. And again, refer to Appendix B in the solicitation to more to better understand what does that mean. It's fairly complicated, and I don't have time to go over it in this solicitation. But again, in this webinar. But feel free to reach out to the Response Center after reading Appendix B if you're still a little confused or wishy-washy about it, and reach out to the Response Center and ask the question. We'll be sure to provide you a more detailed answer. And page 8 of the solicitation gives a very detailed description how to determine your eligibility for the Office of Justice Programs priority areas, and also tells you how to ensure that you receive consideration for each of those priority areas. So please make sure you review page 8 of the solicitation if you think you may be eligible for one of these priority areas. Now, I got a question in that is a pretty, it's a easy question for me to answer right now, so I'm not going to wait until Q&A. The question was, can your application have both program-specific priority consideration and an Office of Justice Program policy priority area consideration? Yes. You can have more than one priority consideration, even just under Office of Justice Program priority considerations. Maybe you're a rural community, an impoverished rural community, and you are a qualified opportunity zone. So, any priority area that you qualify for, make sure you plug that into your program narrative and you read up on how to ensure you receive consideration for every single one of those priority considerations, and make it crystal clear in your application. So yes, you can receive more than one priority consideration, and you qualify and are eligible for more than one, for sure. But that being said, I don't want to scare anybody away that is not eligible for any of the priority considerations, because receipt of priority consideration is not going to guarantee that you get funding. So yes, it's a feather in your cap It'll be definitely helpful for you, but it does not mean that or guarantee that you will get funding. And as I said, failure to receive or be eligible for priority consideration definitely does not necessarily mean that your application will not be funded. So please still apply, even if you do not qualify for a single one priority consideration. We want to see all applications for sure. Now, I wanted to make sure everybody understood, since this is a juvenile justice and mental health collaboration program opportunity, that as an applicant, you will be required to submit a joint application, which will document that at least one justice agency, which can include a mental health court, and at least one mental health agency is going to participate in the administration of this, of whatever collaboration program you are proposing. I know some of you may be proposing training opportunities for personnel, and you're kind of wondering, well, how would that work? Well, if you are proposing a training in this area, you should be connecting with your mental health agency if you are a law enforcement agency and collaborating on creating a curriculum together that would best serve the personnel that you're trying to train. That's just an example. I could see a question like that coming in, but it's just essential that you document that there was a partnership formed for this proposal, and that both agencies were involved in collaborating and creating the proposed program. So the applications must include signed and dated letters of support or intent or MOUs for all key partners, stakeholders involved, anybody that you find relevant to the program. You should get a letter of support for. If you mention them in your program narrative, there really should be a letter of support in the application as well. I've seen a lot of applications where they list all these partners and all these stakeholders that are going to be involved, and then not a single letter of support from them. So just something to think about. And what those letters or MOUs should include are detailed on page 12 of the solicitation. Budget planning. So this statute was very interesting. I've never seen this before, but they have a very, they were very clear on what they wanted the budget to look like, which was that for the planning phase, which would be part of year one of the award, would just be 4 to 6 months, and only $50,000 of total grant money can be allocated toward that short planning phase. So make sure in your budget that you clearly identify which budget line items will be going toward planning costs, so that we can see that you are only budgeting up to $50,000 for your planning phase of the project. The implementation phase, which would be part of year one, and then all of year two and all of year three, will be the rest of your funds, which will be allocated towards your implementation phase. Note that, yes, we want to see a solid budget, and that you thought about everything, and everything kind of aligns with the program narrative in your application, but you will have an opportunity based on what comes out of the planning phase. Maybe you decide to do things a little differently. You will have an opportunity to adjust your budget for the implementation phase if it's necessary. Now, the match requirement. This is also very unique to the statute that governs the funds for the solicitation. There is a match requirement, so make sure you read up about that in the solicitation. It can be cash or in kind. But the statute was very clear that for years 1 and 2, federal funds, 80% of the total costs, federal funds cannot cover more than 80% of the total federal costs for years 1 and 2. So that means for years 1 and 2, there's a 20% match requirement. And then for year 3, just to make it simple, there's a 40% match requirement. That's different from a lot of our other solicitations, and it's because of this specific statutory requirement. For those of you who are math challenged or didn't major in accounting, we broke it down. If you are wondering, well, how the heck am I going to calculate the match for year 1, 2, and 3, we broke it down step by step. I'm not going to go through every step here, but we found this to be very helpful in helping applicants and figure out what is their required match based on the amount of federal funding that they are requesting. So here you go. I suspect that we still might get questions on how to calculate the match despite breaking it down step by step, so feel free to reach out to the Response Center. The budget template is an Excel spreadsheet broken down year by year to help you track totals for each year for both your federal request and your non-federal contribution, which would be your match. So hopefully that will be helpful when you are calculating your match. We've also gotten some questions about what is considered match, what would qualify as match, what is allowable as match. We would probably, and I can't go into that extensively during this webinar because it would take up too much time, but the OJP grant application resource guide that is referenced all throughout the solicitation and is hyperlinked provides an entire section on match that also provides examples as well as how to calculate match. So I would invite you to please review that if you have questions about match first. And then from there, if you still have questions, I would invite you to Google the DOJ Grants Financial Management Guide and read the section there on match and what's allowable. It also provides examples. And if you still have questions about what qualifies as match and what would be acceptable, et cetera, definitely reach out to the Response Center. Again, the questions will come to me and I can hopefully answer your more specific questions. But I will say that if you do have questions like that, the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide is very lengthy and extensive and has a ton of information. And I find myself, for not this solicitation, but for other solicitations, I've been having to just either refer folks to the guide saying it's all right there, or I will just go to the guide myself and cut and paste what's in there and send it on to the applicant. So just want you to be aware of those resources for you instead of taking the time to always necessarily reach out to the Response Center. You might be able to find the answer more quickly for yourself in those guides. So there is a link to the performance measures in this solicitation. And I will say, because this is a new program, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention didn't have performance measures already established for this program, and we had to kind of pick and choose from existing measures that we have, and so they don't mirror or align exactly the way we would want to for this program. So I just want you to keep in mind when you're writing your little section on how you intend to collect data for performance measures for this program, if you were awarded, you know, a number of the programs that you propose are not necessarily going to align with the performance measures asked. For instance, if you are proposing to develop a curriculum and train your personnel, you're not necessarily going to report out on the number of youth you served. Because if you're not a direct services program or you're not proposing one, we don't expect you to report out on those performance measures. But there, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the performance measures link, there's a systems improvement section on measures that refer to training and technical assistance and number of people trained, number of materials developed, or technical assistance materials developed, those may apply to your programs, especially if you're proposing a training program. So we'll work with you in ensuring that, if you are awarded, that you're reporting out on the measures that you can. But the measures that are linked in the solicitation really are a guide to help you develop a section in your program narrative where you can demonstrate that you have the ability and the capacity to collect the data, that you are aware of the data reporting requirements, and that you understand that you will be required to submit data as part of the reporting requirements under this award. There is a link to the performance measures, although there's a more specific link to the actual performance measures for the solicitation in the solicitation. So I would direct you to, if you wanted to see an example of the performance measures, to use the link in the actual solicitation. So if you are brand new to applying to federal funds, I would highly advise that you look at Appendix A, which is entitled What an Applicant Should Do, on page 19 of the solicitation, and also use Appendix A, What an Application Should Include, the checklist there to ensure you have all of the requirements, and that's listed on page 20. These are just some kind of insider tips to make sure that you submit a successful application. For this solicitation, the following items, a program narrative and a budget detail worksheet, are absolutely critical to receive consideration. So if you submit anything, those are the two most important documents to submit for the solicitation in order to receive consideration for funding. Some additional application tips. I would say, even if you're not new to applying for federal funding, because there's always room for improvement, I would suggest that you review Grants 101 on the Office of Justice Programs website, and there's the web link. It's got a lot of great information in there that I wish I had known when before I worked for the feds and was working at a nonprofit writing grants. And if you are new to applying for federal funds, you really need to acquire a DUNS number now and register with SAM and register under grants.gov now. That would be the first thing that you do right after this webinar, because it can take 10 to 14 business days to complete all of the above. Also be sure to read the entire solicitation carefully for all of the application requirements. I know that sounds kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised. Folks don't read the entire solicitation and they miss things, and that could be a point here and there that you could lose. And why lose it if it's right there in the solicitation and you could have made sure that you met that requirement. Also, if you haven't already, you need to identify and contact your project partners ASAP right after this webinar. They really should be the first folks that you talk to in discussing this project. You don't want to be left a couple weeks before the deadline asking for letters of intent or letters of support or help drafting an MOU. Those are all things you want to get fleshed out right now. You want to understand everybody's role, everybody's position in the program that you are proposing, because ultimately it'll help you write your program narrative and design your program around all the partners and stakeholders involved. Another insider tip, I would answer each question in your program narrative and follow the order of the review criteria that is listed in the solicitation, because that is what peer reviewers are going to be doing. They are going to be reviewing each of those questions in that order. And if they don't see that you have answered a particular question in the order that they are used to, they may not give you credit for it. And you may have answered it somewhere else in your program narrative. So just be sure to answer everything in the correct order. Don't sprinkle answers throughout your program narrative. You really want to kind of follow the review criteria one after another, to make it crystal clear to peer reviewers that take a look at your application that you did, in fact, answer all the requirements. Really understand what the percentage for each section is worth. If the program implementation section is worth, or program design section is worth more, that's where you should allocate most of your page allotment resources to. If a certain section is only 10%, then allocate page percentage accordingly. So, I say that because sometimes we'll see a really extensive issue statement and then a very kind of blah program design section, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you really understand what each section is worth. So take a look at that. Be sure to draft your budget early. Really understand what you want the funds to go toward, because ultimately that'll help you design your program and design. And your budget really should align with the program you propose. If the budget doesn't really make sense and doesn't mirror exactly what you wrote in your program narrative, peer reviewers are going to be confused. And then my piece of advice is physically check off every item on the checklist that's provided in the solicitation before submitting. So load everything up in grants.gov or GMS, wherever you're applying, and physically check everything off on the list so you can say, yes, I have attached that and uploaded it before submitting. And then I would aim to submit your application 2 days before the deadline, not the day of the deadline, although I know some of you are procrastinators and will do that anyway. But you just never know if you're having technical issues, or you submit and the next day you realize, oh, I didn't submit, that one letter of intent, because we review the most recent application you submitted. So if you submit early and then you realize, oh, I didn't do something right, or oh, I forgot to include something, you can resubmit another application with the correction, and we will review the most recently submitted application. So another little insider tip there. Here are some useful links, including one to the solicitation, FAQs, as well as that handy OJP grant application resource guide I've been talking about that has a ton of information in there that probably will give you a better explanation for something than I ever can, which is why I usually cut and paste from it. So definitely take a look at these links. And with that, I'm going to end and open things up for Q&A.
All right, great. Thank you, Catherine, and to our audience members, especially those who may have hopped on a little bit later. I do apologize if you experienced any issues of joining the webinar. I was notified during the webinar from our help desk that some people experienced some issues attempting to hop onto the webinar. So for those who just joined, I do apologize if you did experience that issue. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available at a later time on YouTube. So for any parts that you may have missed or had troubles joining, or if Adobe Connect was giving you any issues, please know that, again, all of the items that were covered during today's webinar with Catherine will indeed be posted again on our YouTube page. Again, also want to inform folks who did join that if you do have questions for Catherine, you may type them in the chat box and send them along, and we will address them as well. So Catherine, with that being said, just to let you know that we did receive a lot of questions from registrants about specific program implementation strategies and best practices. I just wanted to open up our Q&A portion by giving you an opportunity to address some of these questions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, William. So I was going through all the registrants' questions in preparation for today's webinar. Some of you did take the time to submit some applications before the webinar, and many of them were kind of geared toward best practices, asking for examples of juvenile justice and mental health collaboration. And I apologize if there was confusion as to the intent and purpose of this webinar. That's why I tried to kind of clear that up right at the beginning, that the purpose of this webinar was really to provide information on the application process for a competitive funding opportunity around this space. But if you did stick through and wanted to get more information on best practices and examples in the field, as I mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, the Bureau of Justice Assistance has been offering the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program for a number of years, and that this was the first year that the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention was offering this program specific to just juvenile justice involved youth. So I can't point you to past awardees or past programs that have been funded under the Juvenile Justice System and Mental Health Collaboration Program, but I still think it would be useful for folks to visit the Council of State Government Justice Center website. Again, that's the Council of State Government Justice Center website. They are going to be the training and technical assistance provider for this program, and they've been the training and technical assistance provider on the adult side of this program, and they have a whole web page on their site where you can look through planning guides, implementation guides, FAQs, funding resources, etc. Many of them are more criminal justice related, but they could still give you some ideas, or I think they're a good starting point as well to see what other grantees are doing in at least the adult space in their jurisdiction. Also, some other useful resources that if you just want to look up some best practices in general, the OJJDP Model Programs Guide, which is on the OJJDP.gov website, has information about evidence-based juvenile justice programs, youth prevention and intervention programs, as well as reentry programs. So that may give you some ideas. And then there's also crimesolutions.gov, which has a lot of research from practitioners and policymakers about what works in the criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system, as well as crime victim services arena. So hopefully for those of you that wanted a bit more information on best practices and examples, that will help you get started.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. And for those of us in the chat window, you all can see that I went ahead and put the websites that Catherine just referenced in the chat box there for you all to easily click on and get access to as well. So the other thing I'd like to mention to you, Catherine, if, say I'm a program, and if we already have an existing program, may we still apply for this particular award?
Yes, definitely. Yes, you could still apply for this award. I think that your application would probably look more like what we call an enhancement proposal, where you have an existing program, but that you are proposing an enhancement to your program, and that is why you need the additional funds. So if you are an existing program that wants to apply for additional funding, that's probably how you would structure your proposal, and also, but you should also ensure that you're complying with the statutory requirements that are outlined in the solicitation.
Outstanding. And Catherine, how will I be notified if my agency is selected to receive an award?
So the point of contact and the authorizing official that you list on your grant application will receive an email award notification. So make sure whoever you list as your point of contact or your authorizing official is still going to be there months from now, and is somebody that checks their email. But the email will go out and provide further information on procedures for accepting your funds, and applicants usually receive this email on or before September 30th of 2020.
And how will I be notified if my agency is not selected to receive an award?
So once the September 30th date passes, and if you haven't received notification, I don't want to say that you haven't gotten an award, because you should wait for an email to come to your listed point of contact or your listed authorizing official on the application. Usually folks that didn't receive an award get an email notification as well as a summary of the peer review comments to give you some feedback on your application by October 30th of 2020.
All right, awesome. Well, Captain, those are all the questions that we have received in advance. If you'd like to take the time now to respond to any questions in the chat box that have not been addressed yet, please note that we do have approximately 13 or a little bit over 13 minutes remaining for the remainder of today's webinar.
Sure. So the first question is if there is a application extension due to COVID-19. And I addressed that in the beginning of this webinar, so I apologize for those of you that had problems getting on and got here late. At this time, there is no application extension. I think that's application extensions are kind of evaluated each week here at the Office of Justice Programs. I am not part of those conversations. That's really high above me. But what I can say is that applications that were due for solicitations that had deadlines before April 1st, they got 2-week extensions. So if things are still not looking good, close 2 weeks out from the deadline, I don't know, I can't guarantee there would be an extension, but it's really a decision that I think is made week to week. And currently right now there is no extension for the deadline. The next question is asking for clarification around what qualifies as a mental health agency. Must it be a formal local health authority, or can it be used to be called the MHMR, or can it be a treatment provider that a juvenile probation department contracts with? And I will say that in the first few slides, again, if this was a late oncomer, the first few slides of this webinar do address what qualifies as a mental health agency. And the solicitation also has a paragraph about what exactly qualifies as a mental health agency. A substance use treatment provider can qualify as a mental health agency if they are also serving co-occurring youth with co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. A number of jurisdictions I know don't necessarily have a county agency or a formal agency, but they end up, the county or the jurisdiction contracts with a particular mental health provider, and they are the ones that jurisdiction uses. The solicitation makes it pretty clear that contracted providers also may qualify. So hopefully that helps, but if you still have additional questions after rereading the solicitation and looking at the slides from this presentation, feel free to reach out to the Response Center. Looking through these questions. So if you are a juvenile court and you are seeking to partner with a, I guess in this case, a mental health agency, they're asking for this question is asking for clarification of whether or not that partner must be a government agency. or can it be a community-based nonprofit organization, for example? I think I would have to better understand the relationship that you're proposing there, as well as the maybe the idea or the partnership that you're proposing. I think that a juvenile justice agency collaborating with a mental health agency can be fairly broad, I would say, as long as that mental health agency is serving youth, justice-involved youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. I think that that can be a very viable partnership. So no, I don't, there are a number of jurisdictions that partner with community-based nonprofit organizations in the community to provide services for their justice-involved youth because they're the only ones available. There isn't a county agency established in their jurisdiction. I think I would, maybe reach out to the response center to ask your specific question there, and maybe provide a specific community nonprofit organization so that we could maybe give you a more accurate answer, because I don't want to tell you without understanding the context and getting a little bit more information, and I don't want to waste your time giving you a half answer right now. So definitely reach out to the response center, whoever submitted that question. The next question, can documents, for example, letters of support, have electronic or non-original signatures in response to restrictions due to COVID-19? Of course. We totally understand electronic signatures are fine. What I would suggest, most folks have electronic letterhead. As long as the letter of intent has agency letterhead or organizational letterhead, I think it's understandable that you're not going to have ink signatures on the letters of support, nor I think I don't think I've ever required that, even outside of the current situation. So letterhead is more important than an ink signature. Hope that answers that person's question. And the last question, maybe not last because I see other people are typing in the chat box. Question is to clarify, programs can apply, but only with the support from at least one juvenile justice entity, or will juvenile justice need to be the primary on the proposal? So it needs to be a joint application. And what does that mean? It means yes, there will be one primary. So for instance, like the juvenile justice agency may be the primary, or the mental health agency may be the primary, but there needs to be a clear collaboration between a juvenile justice agency and a mental health agency working toward better serving youth with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use. So it needs to be a joint collaboration program, not a juvenile justice agency, for example, proposing to do something and they just get a letter of support from the local mental health agency saying, yeah, this sounds like a good idea. It needs to be you two working together to propose a program that you think will better serve the justice-involved youth in your jurisdiction with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. The next question is a complicated match question. Again, as I stated earlier, please read the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide and then the DOJ Grants Financial Management Guide on the match section, in the match sections on that. If you still have questions, please reach out to the response center and I'll answer your question in depth. But I invite people to go to those resources first if they have match questions. The next question if a partnership is required to apply, does OJJDP require the Juvenile Justice Agency to go through the competitive bidding process? I'm not quite sure I understand the question. So whoever wrote that question, you may need to write a follow-up question or a for example, because I think I know what you're getting at, but I want to be sure. So please write a follow-up to that. Can the Juvenile Justice Agency work with multiple mental health agencies? Yes, that sounds amazing, whoever wants to do that. So yes, for sure. That sounds great. And I think that's it in the chat box for now. All right, any other questions, folks? Oh, I see. So follow-up question to if a partnership is required to apply, does OJJDP require the Juvenile Justice Agency to go through the competitive bidding process, for example, to select the mental health agency that they partner with? That's an interesting question. I think the idea here for this program as a Juvenile Justice Agency, that you already have an idea of who you want to work with as the mental health collaborator that you want to collaborate with. So I wouldn't, very interesting question. I wouldn't expect you to have to go through a bidding process. I think that that's up to you, and you can reach out to the providers that you think would be the best fit to support you in the program design that you are hoping to propose to us. So I don't think we would require proof of a competitive bidding process. We would already want you to have that relationship with that mental health agency before applying. I think that's it.
All right. Yes, and we have about 3 minutes left. And so for those who didn't get a chance to ask your question, I do want to be respectful of folks' time. And I do have just a few minutes to wrap up with. Any other question that you may have, feel free to submit it to the response center, which is located on Catherine's slide here. So that being said, I would like to thank Catherine for a great presentation on this grant solicitation, for this solicitation webinar. And before we wrap up, I do just have a few brief reminders for everyone. First off, I want to make sure that you all stay in contact with InTech by following us on Facebook or joining us on our listserv, where you will be updated on additional webinars that we have coming up, which a few of them I will go over in a little bit. If you all are looking to get in contact with OJJDP, please feel free to contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. The contact information is located on this slide. We've also placed it in the chat box as well. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? Well, if so, please be sure to reach out via the OJJDP TTA 360 platform. The link for that platform is located on this slide. And just a reminder that the webinar will be located on our YouTube page for convenience for individuals who may have missed part of the webinar or would like to recap certain parts. Please note that if you'd like to get the supporting materials referred to this particular solicitation, you may contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. Please be sure to join us for the upcoming solicitation that we have tomorrow, actually, strategies to support CEV solicitation that we have. You can click here to learn more, or you can select the Register Now button to register for that webinar. Also, we have a couple of other non-solicitation related webinars coming up in April and in May. One regarding cyberbullying and another one focusing on legal representation matters for families affected by substance use disorders. So please be sure to click on the Learn More to learn more about each of those upcoming events and the Register Now to register for each of those events. Finally, for those that we have remaining, I did have one last poll question for you all to complete. So everyone who is remaining on today's webinar, if you could please take just a moment and indicate to us, how do you plan to apply the information from this webinar to your work? You can select multiple options here, or you can select one. It's completely up to you, but notice that you can please select all that apply. We again want to know, how do you plan to apply the information from this webinar to your work? Again, I want to give a thank you for our audience and our participants. Thank you to our presenter, Catherine, for joining. And with that, I will let you all go for the rest of your afternoon. Again, thank you all for joining. Have a great afternoon. Please stay safe. Please stay healthy. Goodbye.